Those who have studied the history of the modern Imperium of Man would be forgiven for thinking that the Space Marines were the first and greatest of the Emperor's genetic experiments. Dig a little deeper, however, and you find that they were neither. Those honours go, as far as we're aware, to the Legiones Custodes, but during the period before the Great Crusade, the Emperor created more than just his guardians. In fact, the Legiones Astartes weren't even the first of their own lineage, but were instead the replacement and successor to another group. These transhuman warriors were the conquering force of the Unification Wars, each more than the equal of a Space Marine, but almost annihilated before the Imperium left its future capital. They were the Legiones Cataegis, or more commonly, the Thunder Warriors. This is Tactica Imperialis, and welcome to 40k Stories. The creation of the Thunder Warriors is not particularly documented, and even if the Astartes knew their heritage, as it wasn't a really guarded secret, the process has now been forgotten. It is assumed to be an inferior or less efficient version of the process used to create a firstborn Astartes, which we discussed in a log a long time ago. It must be noted that the Emperor had neither the manpower nor the available resources for the creation of the Thunder Warriors as he did for the Astartes. The gene labs of Luna were decades or centuries from being conquered, the Martian Mechanicum had yet to be rediscovered, and Terra was an anarchic hellscape. I am aware that neither Luna nor Mars would be needed to create the Astartes either, their absence merely demonstrates the reduced options. I won't dawdle on the techno-barbarians and the state of Terra much here, there's a log on the planet's history lying around in the archives, but trust me when I say that if you think modern Terra is inhospitable, grim, and merciless to inhabitant and visitor, then you have another thing coming. The Thunder Warriors emerged alongside the Emperor when he revealed himself for the first time, around the time of the birth of Slaanesh and the end of the warp storms that raged through the Age of Strife. Exactly how many were made is unclear, but the total size of the Legiones Cataegis would be dwarfed by even a single one of an average Legio Astartes at full operating strength. Rough estimates I've seen put the absolute maximum in the region of 20,000 Thunder Warriors, though it could be more or less. But in concert with the 10,000 of the Legio Custodes, even this relatively small force was able to conquer Terra in the Emperor's name. Interestingly, the similarities between the Cataegis and the Astartes did not end with genetic heritage. The Emperor seemingly trialed several concepts and nomenclatures on the Thunder Warriors that would go on to define the Space Marines. For example, there were 20 legions of Thunder Warriors, each led by a Primarch. However, the Primarchs of the Thunder Warriors possessed no genetic or technological advantages over their peers like the ones of the Astartes would, instead being a warrior of the ranks promoted to overall command based on battlefield performance. Not dissimilar, I suppose, from the Legion Masters that commanded the Astartes until the discovery of their Primarchs. The Cataegis for the most part used power armor, though the Mark I Thunder armor was neither void capable nor entirely powered. The legs in particular didn't have the servos and such we see today, and many would use simple plate armor and las rifles, especially early on. It's worth pointing out that power armor was not even the Emperor's creation, and was used widely by the techno-barbarians whose warriors would be similarly equipped to the Thunder Warriors. As such, it would be the raw genetic power of the Cataegis that allowed them to carry the day against even overwhelming odds. And believe me, even without the resources or the know-how he would go on to use on the Astartes, the Emperor was still able to engineer absolute killing machines from the possibly unwilling volunteers to the Thunder Warriors. Possessed of incredible strength necessary to carry that not entirely powered power armor, the Cataegis were able to even match or occasionally outperform the Custodes in combat engagements. They had thickened bones and greatly enhanced reflexes even compared to the Astartes, and to combat the prevalent psychics following the Age of Strife, they were given significant psychic resistance. They weren't blanks, at least as far as we're aware, but I don't doubt that there was an attempt to emulate the mutation that would define the Silent Sisterhood. In combination with their armor and weapons, the Thunder Warriors were, by the standards of the Unification Wars at least, utterly invincible in combat. Not immortal, they did suffer heavy casualties, but there are no surviving records that ever suggest them losing. Well, except possibly one. You see, the blunt force and unrefined modifications of the Emperor had a significant and detrimental effect on the bodies and minds of the Thunder Warriors. We're not sure exactly why, and I doubt even the most skilled geneticist not named the Emperor could do more than hazard a guess. The Cataegis were universally short-lived, a stark contrast to the biologically immortal Custodes, suffering severe physical degradation and occasionally just dropping dead at random. They were prone to fits of instability and bloodlust, unleashing savage assaults heedless of orders that even disturbed Captain General of the Custodes, Constantin Valdor. Unlike the Custodians and to an extent the Astartes, the Thunder Warriors did not lose their emotion during their ascension either, and whilst their dark, dry humour would likely be appreciated by many today, they were still the warriors and warlords of Terra at their core, hyper-violent, battle-hungry ones at that. As such, the Legiones Cataegis were never to leave Terra, at least by most records. Officially, they were wiped out to the last during one of the final battles of the Unification Wars, the battle at Mount Ararat. This mandated the creation of the Legiones Astartes and the Primarch Project to replace them as humanity's elite warriors in the Great Crusade. However, this is untrue, or at the very least misleading, as whilst the Thunder Warriors were almost wiped out on Ararat, it was not at the hands of the Techno-Barbarians. Instead, as far as we know, it was the Legio Custodes that killed the Thunder Warriors, massacring them to clear the way for their replacement by the Astartes, who were less effective in combat, but far more stable and mass-producible. It is also speculated, if not known, that the Emperor did not reinforce the Cataegis after their initial creation, letting them be thinned during the Unification Wars to make the job of the Custodians easier when it ended. However, the massacre was not total, and there were survivors. A small contingent of Thunder Warriors even managed to leave Terra for a time. However, their short-lived nature and inherent instability, combined with the lack of new ones once the Astartes were created, means that the Legiones Cataegis are almost certainly extinct by now. But they have not entirely been forgotten. Some Mark I armour is kept by the Astartes as relics, never to be used of course, it won't fit, it's woefully low tech, and it won't survive space. But the heretic Astartes, namely those from the traitor legions who've survived since the Great Crusade, can actually remember them, well, to an extent. They at the very least heard about them during the Crusade, which is as close as you'll get from a non-custodian, I suspect. Ironically, when they first encountered the Primaris Space Marines, a group of them referred to the Firstborn as being the new or the next Thunder Warriors, implying that the Firstborn will be put down or wiped out eventually, possibly by the Imperium's own hand. Whether that comes to pass or not remains to be seen, but I'm sure that for certain Firstborn, it's lingering at the backs of their minds. With the history of the Thunder Warriors broadly established, let's look at some famous events from both the Unification Wars and the following decades to involve the Legiones Cataegis. As far as records suggest, the first time a full legion of the Cataegis was unleashed came at the Battle of Moorland Sen, where the 4th Legion, the Iron Lords, were led by the Emperor himself alongside the Custodes and the beginnings of the Imperial Army. And yes, the 4th were the Iron Lords, and the 4th Legio Astartes were the Iron Warriors. It seems that original naming conventions wasn't exactly the Emperor's strong point. The Priest King of Moorland Sen had slowly and inexorably been corrupted by the Chaos Gods answering his prayers, and the confederacy he led contained hordes of clones, gene-modded warriors, and psychers. Even with 22 regiments of humans and the full might of the Iron Lords, the future Imperium was supposedly outnumbered 7-1 by the Confederacy, and it is therefore a testament to the Thunder Warriors that they were able to triumph, though not without heavy losses, and I don't doubt the Emperor was a big help too. It was here that the Cataegis also showed their instabilities, as the Thunder Warriors slipped into a berserk frenzy during the battle that would probably put even the Wolfen and the Black Rage to shame. As I mentioned earlier, it perturbed Captain General Valdor enough that he worried for their future, and he would prove to be right given what happened at Ararat. Most of the Wars of Unification are only mentioned by name without any detail, but following the Ararat massacre, the Thunder Warriors would pop up in small clusters on multiple occasions. Right at the end of the war, before the Imperial Palace had finished construction, the 4th Legion's Primarch Ushotan would join the Grand Provost Marshal of what became the Adeptus Arbites in the so-called Palace Coup. This was not a revolt against the Emperor, far from it, at least for Ushotan and Marshal Kandawire, but an appeal to the Emperor to bring justice for Ararat through its accused orchestrator, Captain General Constantin Valdor. Ararat had happened behind the back of the early Senatorium Imperialis, of which the Marshal was one as part of the Ford Lord's Civilian. As a result, Kandawire and Ushotan sought Valdor's arrest and trial before the Emperor, so that justice could properly be served. However, the custodians were far ahead of the curve and saw it coming, and when Valdor failed to talk the conspirators down, well, it got ugly. The Thunder Warriors came face to face with their replacements, the first 10,000 of the First Legio Astartes, the future Dark Angels. Rather than involve the Emperor, who was busy with some other project, either the assault on Luna or the Primarch project seemed likely, Valdor unleashed the Astartes against the Cataegis. Despite being outmatched 1 versus 1, the Space Marines had better armor, weapons, numbers, and tactics, using the brotherhood and teamwork unique to them to put the Thunder Warriors down whilst Valdor dispatched Ushotan. Small bands of individual Thunder Warriors would crop up a few more times in recorded history once the Great Crusade got going. Most notably, a group who renamed themselves the Tara were able to find their way to, or were imprisoned and sent to, the asteroid prison colony known as Cerberus. Around the time of the first expeditionary fleets departing Terra, Cerberus rose up, and the 12th Legio Astartes, the warhounds that would become the World Eaters, were tasked with putting it down. The Cerberus insurrection, as it is known, has broadly been covered up, but it was believed to last for several hours following the warhounds' arrival, with a lot of close quarters fighting that gave the advantage to the stronger Thunder Warriors. But the warhounds did win in the end, with very few survivors left behind for the Imperial army to mop up. Reports suggest that each of the Tara took around 4 or 5 Space Marines down with them before eventually succumbing to their injuries. No surprise perhaps, given their headbutt could crack an Astarte's skull, even accounting for the likely deterioration. The last known surviving Thunder Warriors we have records of are, believe it or not, from the Horus Heresy. One of their commanders, perhaps even a Primarch, known as Aric Taranis, had managed to live through the Great Crusade and even set his mind to scientific pursuits. Having supposedly raised the lightning banner of the Emperor on Ararat before being killed, Taranis was a legend of the Cataegis with a set of battle honours to match. However, he knew or at least believed that the Thunder Warriors were, to the Emperor at least, an expendable means to an end in the conquest of Terra, and he held no grudge against the Emperor for the massacre at Ararat. Rather than plot revenge or something like that, Taranis used his intellect and a hidden lab facility to research genetics. He was far from the Emperor's level, of course, and he was unable to cure the degradation of the Thunder Warriors, but he kept himself alive, well, just about. In the early days of the Horus Heresy, however, things changed for Taranis. He and a fellow Thunder Warrior chanced upon the group calling themselves the Outcast Dead, the members of the Crusader host that had been imprisoned due to their legions betraying the Imperium. There was to be a deal struck between the Astartes and their predecessors, but Imperial hunters caught up to the Outcast Dead before such a deal could happen. And yet, from the chaos of the battle between the hunters and the outcasts, Taranis was given an opportunity to get what he wanted without having to bargain. He and his lieutenant took advantage of the battle to acquire and make off with the progenoid glands of one of the outcast dead slain by the hunters. Using his lab and skill set, Taranis was able to understand and even replicate these progenoids, which he suspected could have been able to stabilize the survivors of the Cataegis. Whether it worked or not is lost to history, but Terra has never encountered Thunder Warrior forces again to our knowledge, and old age would have finished off Taranis long ago. But on a planet of quadrillions where being unnoticed is the norm, who's to say that the legacy of the Thunder Warriors hasn't lived on? with the work of Taranis iterated on over and over to reverse engineer Astartes' gene seed for use by the Cataegis. The odds of it would be astronomical, but non-zero, so maybe, just maybe, there's a Thunder Warrior out there today, not an original one who saw the battles of Terra, but a new breed, genetically and mentally stable, maybe with a lifespan to match a Space Marine and the technology to allow his line to continue. It's a long shot, but this is Terra. There's that many people and that much science that maybe, just maybe. So ends the tale of the Legiones Cataegis, the Thunder Warriors. Crudely but effectively gene-modded by the Emperor, these proto-Astartes were vastly superior to their successors physically, but at great cost to their minds and biological stability. Faced with purges from the Custodians and arguably the Astartes, as well as their inherent degradation and a lack of reinforcement, it is testament to their will and strength that the Thunder Warriors were still around and active even decades after their supposed annihilation. They may be gone now, but their legacy is one that should never be forgotten. Without them, there may have never been an Imperium of Man in the first place, and galactic history would be incalculably changed by their absence. For now, however, we must move on. Next time, something more modern, since we've been exploring a lot of ancient history recently. We'll stay with the Imperium though, after a fashion at least, moving from genetic to mechanical modification and exploring the legions of another empire. Thank you for watching Tactica Imperialis, and I'll see you all again. Goodbye.